The year is 247 BC. Rome and Carthage are nearing the final stages of a decades-long war, one that saw some of the bloodiest naval combat in all of human history. Of all the events in 247 BC, one would have never suspected that the simple birth of a child would be the one that would force the great city of Rome to its knees. But this wasn't just any child. This was Hannibal Barca. The infamous Hannibal was the son of an already notorious Carthaginian general, Hamilcar Barca. When he was but 9 years old, his father would implant a vicious hatred of Rome in him when he took Hannibal along for a conquest of Spain. It was here that Hannibal would learn from his father and slowly become forged into a vessel for Rome's annihilation. Hamilcar took his son to the temple of Baal, and Hannibal swore an oath to never be an ally of Rome. From here is where his story truly begins. After many years of successful conquest in Spain, Hannibal eventually found himself the sole leader of the Carthaginian army after his father and brother-in-law were assassinated. He would become incredibly popular with his troops. In the words of Philip Freeman, author of the book Hannibal, Rome's Greatest Enemy, quote, Hannibal developed quickly a reputation among the common soldier as a leader who did not seek special privileges or shrink from danger. He was, even as the hostile Roman writer Livy put it, a model soldier and commander. End quote. He would choose to suffer the same hardships as his men, earning a great deal of respect, and was always, quote, the first man on the field and the last to leave. End quote. This respect would be a greater weapon than any sword or spear, as this loyalty would keep his army together during one of the most legendary military expeditions in world history, the Second Punic War. The Second Punic War began not over an attack on Rome, but one on the city of Saguntum. To make a long story short, Rome would suddenly ally themselves with a small city-state, declaring any attack against them to be an attack on Rome. However, this city-state was within territory promised to Hannibal during a prior treaty between Carthage and Rome. He should have been free to capture it as he pleased, but the Romans, wanting to provoke him, interfered to cause a political debacle. As Hannibal was preparing to take Saguntum, Roman politicians showed up at his door, threatening him with war should he capture the city. They thought they really put one over on old Hannibal until he promptly told them to stuff it and get bent. He would take Saguntum, thus causing the start of the Second Punic War. Rome was probably ecstatic at this turn of events. An excuse to wipe Carthage off the map? They were all over it. They planned to send two armies out, one under Consul Longus to siege Carthage, and one under Consul Scipio the Elder to monitor Hannibal in Spain. There was nothing Carthage could do. They had Hannibal trapped and an easy victory in their hands. After all, what could Hannibal do? He had no way into Rome. What was he gonna do? Cross the Alps? As history remembers, that's exactly what he did. Hannibal's crossing of the Alps is still regarded today as one of the most impressive feats of the ancient world. From ambushes to natural disasters, Hannibal faced plight after plight on his journey through the most hostile mountain range in Europe. Soldiers would fall off the sides of icy cliffs. They would starve. They would often be forced to put down sick and dying men in order to steal their clothes for warmth. For all intents and purposes, it was hell on earth, and yet he still made it out in one piece. He would touch down in Italy, but his challenges were far from over. He had just arrived, which meant Consul Scipio the Elder was waiting for him. Hannibal's first battle with Rome would be quick and brutal. The Battle of Ticinius was quickly decided when Hannibal displayed the first of his many assets, his cavalry. Hannibal's cavalry was composed of some of the best cavalrymen in the world, the Numidians. Their pure speed would be a perfect match for Hannibal's signature tactic, the double envelopment. His cavalry would quickly flank from either side, enclosing the enemy force with lightning speed for an easy win. This was especially effective against the Romans, who would often fight through brute force to win their battles. It was this battle and in many more that Hannibal would display his genius and the ability to understand the Roman mind. Rome had been outclassed, and they had begun to realize they had a real problem on their hands. When discussing the story of Hannibal, There is no better battle to showcase the genius he's remembered for than that of the Battle of Cannae. The Battle of Cannae should have been impossible for Hannibal to win by any reasonable standard. The Roman army had assembled a fighting force of roughly 88,000 men, outnumbering Hannibal 2 to 1, if not even more. They selected a narrow fighting area, the idea being to prevent Hannibal from utilizing his Numidian cavalry. As the two sides geared up for war, the Romans had prepared themselves for an honorable, all out slugfest. But if we've learned anything about Hannibal, it's that he doesn't play by Rome's rules. Through his masterful military strategy, he managed to completely control the situation. First, he maneuvered his army so that the wind would be to their back, blowing sand and dust into the faces of the Romans. Second, he placed his elite troops on the sides of the battlefield, and his weaker troops in the center, forming an outward bulge. When the battle started, the Romans crushed into the center line, pushing them so far back that this outward bulge would start to curve inwards. As the Romans charged after the fleeing Carthaginians, Hannibal made his move. The elite troops he benched earlier moved in from the sides, some wearing Roman armor as a disguise to sow chaos and confusion. The Roman formation began to break down as Hannibal rallied his center line to reorganize so his Numidian cavalry could sweep up from behind for an enclosure. Hannibal had used Rome's overwhelming force against them, forcing them to encircle themselves and play right into his hand. From here, the battle would turn into a killing field that ultimately resulted in over 80,000 Roman casualties, roughly 20% of Rome's military aged men. Gallons upon gallons of blood were spilled upon the battlefield as Hannibal unleashed total carnage. This was it. This was his revenge. He had done it. He had defeated Rome. Or so he thought. In all his genius, there is one thing Hannibal must have failed to recognize: the incredibly tedious Roman tenacity. Until every last Roman was crushed, there would be no surrender. Rome had still suffered a massive loss, and spirits were low, however. It seemed there was almost no chance they would survive this war. Every battle they would fight, Hannibal whooped them due to their simple minded thinking. The decision was clear: Rome would need a Hannibal of their own. Enter Scipio the Younger, son of the consul who engaged Hannibal years ago in his first battle on Italian soil. Scipio was not like other Romans. He too had a genius strategic mind. While Hannibal was wreaking havoc in Italy, Scipio wreaked havoc in Spain, his base of support. This caused a multitude of problems for Hannibal, which would see Scipio growing a reputation of his own. His path of destruction would eventually see him threatening Carthage, resulting in the Carthaginians making the only play they could: recalling Hannibal to the homeland. And now we arrive what might as well be the conclusion of the Second Punic War. Two legendary generals, famed for their trickery, intelligence, and willpower. One final battle. The Battle of Zama began with Scipio and Hannibal riding out to the center of the battlefield, finally meeting in person after hearing so much of each other. Hannibal did his best to talk Scipio down, but Scipio wasn't having it. With that, the battle was inevitable. Interestingly enough, due to many outside circumstances, Hannibal found himself on the same side of the page that Rome did at the earlier Battle of Cannae. He had a much larger army, but Scipio had secured the allegiance of the Numidian cavalry, now sporting his own secret weapon. The battle itself was filled with enough twists and turns to write a movie about. Hannibal sent out his war elephants to smash through the Roman lines, but Scipio had organized his troops in a way that would allow them to step aside and avoid them. Additionally, his Numidian cavalry made short work of Hannibal's, chasing them from the battlefield. Hannibal would use this to his advantage, though, attempting to lure the Numidian cavalry far from the battlefield, so his superior numbers would have time to cut down the Roman army. He had organized his troops so that his strongest men were in the back, requiring the Romans to fight through an entire battle to get to the real fight. His men, however, would be fresh and ready to go. It was here the deciding factor would be apparent. Would Hannibal's army have enough time to cut down the Romans before the cavalry returned? Unfortunately for Hannibal, luck was not on his side. The Roman cavalry returned in time, smashing into his back line. He had lost, and he knew it, so he fled the battlefield. Despite his loss, historians regard this battle as almost perfectly fought on both sides. Hannibal's rampage of terror had finally been put to an end. So, what of Hannibal after this? Well, he would do what was typical for most military men after a war. He entered Carthaginian politics for a while, but due to negative sentiment and jealousy of others, he would ultimately choose to enter exile. Rome never stopped hunting him down, hoping to one day bring him in. Hannibal would evade capture, though, living out until his late 60s, where he would commit suicide to die on his own terms to avoid capture. His last words, recorded by Livy, were as follows: "Let us relieve the Romans from the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it tries their patience too much to wait for an old man's death." Using his intelligence and ingenuity, Hannibal cemented himself as one of, if not the greatest military mind in history. His story and crossing of the Alps is still remembered to this day, and his rivalry with the equally notorious Scipio Africanus is one historians have written countless books about. That's what makes him so interesting to me. In my own words, it's straight out of an action movie. And sometimes history ends up crafting a story just as impactful as fiction, and there is no better case of that than Hannibal Barca.